All right, welcome everybody to another episode of The Independent. I'm here with Michael Schwartz. He's with the Gun Owners Radio and also the San Diego County Gun Owners Association. Michael, I just want to say thank you for being a part of my podcast. One of the things I wanted to ask you is you could tell me a little bit about your background, how you got into, a gun rights, advocate. How did that come about?
Sure. So I was in banking. I had a banking and financial services for about 16 years. And 2007, I would just gotten married.
Okay.
And my new wife and another couple, we were out in the desert on federal land, camping, shooting, off-roading, just having fun.
Yeah.
And a Bureau of Land Management law enforcement officer came over. My wife at the time, she and her friend took my Jeep. And so I took all the guns out of it, and there was all laying on a tarp on the ground.
Yeah.
So he came over and started looking at the guns. No problem.
Yeah.
I said, "Hi, how you doing?" And he picked up a shotgun that I owned and said, "Whose is this?" And I said, "It's mine." He said, "Well, it's illegal."
Wow.
And I said, "No, it's not illegal."
Yeah.
And this was a pump action shotgun, one of the most basic. Nothing fancy.
Right.
And I said, no, it's not illegal. And he said, yeah, in California, it's illegal. And I said, no, it's legal. Now I was very polite and professional. And, but I started kind of taking him down this road and getting him to say yes to things and I said, no. Like, for example, I asked, I said, the barrel is 18 1/4 inches, which is 1/4 inch over the legal minimum, right? And he said, yeah. And I asked him a series of questions, getting him to say yes. And then I finally said, and the overall length is 30 inches or 31 inches, which is 1 inch over the legal minimum of 30 inches, right?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah. And I said, no, shotguns, it's 26 inches. And I made it clear that he didn't understand. He didn't know the law that he was trying to enforce.
Right.
So he said, all right, I'm going to take your ID. I'm going to run the numbers on the shotgun. And if it's not stolen, you can have it back. Yeah. Well, I knew it wasn't stolen. And again, I was being very polite and nice. So I followed him to his car and continued the conversation and found out that he was a gun guy. He went to that exact same place in the desert with his friends and shot. Yeah. He didn't agree with the law that he didn't understand.
Wow.
He didn't like it. He was a hobbyist, and I just thought, man, and this guy was ready to, I shortened the story considerably, but this guy was ready to arrest me.
Wow.
He was ready to arrest me. And, it really affected me. He finally just said, all right, you're good to go. And, the other three went, oh yeah, woo, but it really affected me. I really sat down and thought, wow, like there's a guy who doesn't agree with these laws, does the same thing I do, but he was ready to throw me in cuffs and haul me away for what? For a government paycheck.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a good feeling.
Yeah. Now, do you think that was his motive, or do you think was he just looking to maybe, ticket someone or to put something on the books? Was there anything there that made it feel like he had an ulterior motive, or?
Honestly, I think no.
Okay.
He didn't have an ulterior motive, which makes it more sad.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Which, he just was kind of, I got to do what I got to do. I'm going to work, and then I wake up and I go make the donuts, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, gosh, you just sell out all your principles and your opinions for a paycheck every 2 weeks. And I thought it's really sad. Yeah. So I went and told some friends, like, hey, this is what happened to me over the weekend. And they kind of had this attitude of, well, why were you shooting guns?
Right.
And I thought, what is going on? Like, this is, you know what I mean? And I thought the attitude has to change. If I were out there printing a pamphlet that was critical of the government or something like that, and federal cops came and tried to take the printing press.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Or if I were out there doing some kind of church service, and the federal government tried to, people would be up in arms. Right. But there was an attitude towards the Second Amendment, like it was somehow like I had to apologize for exercising this right. That's what got me into being a volunteer advocate. And I did that for years. I mean, like the next month, I'm showing up at meetings and got involved. Yeah. And I did that for years. And then finally in 2015, I left my job at the bank and started San Diego County Gun Owners, which is a political organization.
Oh, wow.
And that's what led to Gun Owners Radio. And
Yeah.
San Diego County Gun Owners now has about 3,600 members.
Wow.
From the county of San Diego. And it's also, we have Orange County Gun Owners and Inland Empire Gun Owners. We actually have a 501c3 that supports our women's program too. So it's flourished.
Yeah.
It's been really amazing.
Awesome. One of the things, I think we might have met once before at, do you do the CCW course?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I went to that course, and, one of the things, I didn't end up getting my CCW, but I will tell you, one of the things that I really enjoyed was how friendly people are.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes people, their perception of the gun community is that they're maybe rude or standoffish, but they're actually a very friendly atmosphere. You can go in there saying, hey, I don't know anything about guns. I'm interested. What can I learn here? And people will be more than happy to talk to you and help you. And so I did really appreciate that.
I think that misconception or that stereotype comes from groups that maybe that aren't friendly, who happen to own guns.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily call them, the gun community. You know what I mean?
Right.
So they're the gun community that I know, especially in San Diego, is young and old, men and women, every kind of heritage, every socioeconomic class, you name it, they're across the board. And they're the most friendly people.
Right.
Like you said, if you go up and say, hey, will you show me how to use your gun? Oh yeah. Boom. You're their best friend. So I've met through, Second Amendment advocacy, I've met some of the best people in San Diego County. And I'm really happy about that. It's very cool.
Well, if I was somebody from another country or maybe a little kid and I didn't know anything about anything, what does the Second Amendment mean to you? What is it?
Well, that's good. That's an excellent question. And, there's a lot of answers, really. It comes down to self-defense.
Okay.
But I think the answer I would use to tell somebody who doesn't really understand, maybe, they didn't grow up around the culture, maybe they didn't grow up in this country, there's about 5,000 years of written human history. It's only about 5,000 years, right? And you've really only been able to defend yourself with a firearm, because it's portable, for about 250 years, something like that. And I think it's inarguable that a firearm is the most effective and best self-defense tool that man has ever created. So in that 250 years, out of 5,000 plus years, in that 250 years, that's the only time you've really truly been able to carry a firearm, in defense of yourself. And in that 250 years, we've seen a country built on the premise that individuals are important and individual rights are important. We've seen women's rights flourish. We've seen LGBT rights flourish. We've seen the rights of minorities in different parts of the country flourish. None of that. That's not a coincidence. The fact that people could effectively defend themselves as individuals was a major factor, one of the many, but a major factor in people being their individual rights and their dignity and their self, the respect for self, all that flourished.
Right.
So on a very broad macro level, that's what the Second Amendment means.
The ability to protect oneself. And sometimes on a personal level, that even outside of the Second Amendment, protecting yourself is also a God-given right, or human right.
Natural right, God-given right, however you want to phrase it. Absolutely.
Now, when it comes to different kind of gun control laws, would you say that there is some level of laws we should have? And I'll give you age, criminals shouldn't get guns. Would you say that there should be some level of laws?
So the way we phrase it is we represent and fight for the rights of sane, trained, law-abiding gun owners. A lot of people, there's kind of this popular myth that people like to say is that, gun owners refuse to compromise.
Right.
The reality is we've been compromising for 100 years and it's getting to the point where it's no longer a compromise. It's truly an infringement at this point. So, there are a lot of laws on the books that
Yeah.
we're not trying to get rid of.
Right.
It's just that it's gone so far and it's become so unreasonable that, okay, we're not, it's not compromise anymore.
Right.
We've been compromising for a long time, but now it's just downright, ridiculous and restrictive.
Yeah. And, one of the things some people talk about, is there, there's a lot of different guns now that are available that weren't around 100, 200 years ago. What are your thoughts on where some guns should be illegal? I mean, or like, should we be able to have a machine gun or a 50 caliber? Is that something that you guys feel that, or that you personally maybe feel, is that a right that everybody has, or is there a limit to the how strong a firearm is, I guess?
So one of the problems is especially in California, is the way that they have restricted the types of firearms that people can have. Is they're not based on function or power; they're based on aesthetics.
Okay. And
if you do that, if you can ban, firearm A because it looks,
right,
scarier than
right,
firearm B, but the function is the same, then you're in effect, you can ban firearm B.
Right.
You know what I mean? So if you can ban firearm A just because of the way it looks, and it doesn't function any different than firearm B, then you can ban firearm B. So then what's stopping you from banning any firearms?
Right.
So there's this kind of this, well, gee, if Schwarzenegger or Rambo used it, then we need to ban it, right, because it looks scary on TV. We don't really, we have a lawsuit against two different types of bans in California. One is banning semi-automatic rifles, that's based on their aesthetic looks, the ban is. And then one is on pistol bans. California has a very broad ban on pistols. You can't purchase a pistol from a dealer if it doesn't have what's called a micro stamp. So it's not stamping a little tiny serial number on the brass before it's ejected. Well, that technology literally doesn't exist. Oh. So they're basically saying, okay, you can sell any gun you want as long as it has this technology that doesn't exist. Right. So when, like, we're not going after the machine gun ban that started in the 1930s. Right. You know what I mean? We're not looking for bazookas. We're not. So again, we've been pretty reasonable. It's just that they're getting to the point where it's like, well, wait a minute, using that logic, we're not gonna be able to get any pistols eventually. And using that logic, you're going to be able to ban any kind of guns. Right. So that's where we draw the line. And,
correct me if I'm wrong. One of the guns that gets a lot of attention is the AR-15.
Yep.
And from my understanding, the AR-15, once again, you said has that look to it. Right. But in terms of, capability, isn't that much different than a Glock. Would that be correct?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. So, okay. I mean, as far as it functions. And the reason, and I think it's important, a lot of people don't understand why an AR pattern rifle is popular.
Right.
Why do people need it, or why is it being used? If you look at cars, for example, right? Mm-hmm. You look at cars, they've kind of figured out that, all right, 4 tires and 1 steering wheel and a windshield, that's what works. Right. You know what I mean? Like it kind of has these, similar characteristics. Right. An AR was actually designed in the 60s, and they basically got the function right. So it works well. Mm-hmm. It's fairly reliable. It kind of had a bumpy start, but now it's reliable. It does what it's supposed to do. It does everything that a firearm is supposed to do. It does it efficiently. It's not the ones that are sold to civilians are not machine guns, mm-hmm. and they're not even necessarily very high caliber. It's kind of a mid-grade caliber. Okay. In fact, the caliber that an AR fires, you can't go deer hunting with that caliber. It's too small.
So, not to cut you off. So, sure. Somebody who's going deer hunting is actually going to be using, if they're using a rifle, that's going to be actually a more powerful bullet, is what you're saying.
Typically.
Typically. Okay.
Yeah. So, I can't make a blanket statement that there's nobody out there that uses an AR, but that's, an AR is kind of a mid grade. Right. But the thing about it is, okay, so now it's gotten all the the pieces in place so that it works effectively. It doesn't jam, it's reliable, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
On top of that, you can kind of tailor this thing to whatever you're looking for. If you're 5 feet tall and 100 pounds, you can make an AR fit you. If you're
really?
6'5" and 300 pounds, you can make the exact same design fit you. So they've figured out how to make it modular, basically. So, all right, well, we need a barrel that's a little bit shorter, a little bit longer. We need a stock that's a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, that sort of thing.
Interesting.
So a lot of people, a husband and wife can use the same firearm, even though she's 5 feet and he's 6 feet.
See, I didn't even know that. I didn't know you could do that.
So it's just a really successful design. That's why you hear so much about it. That's why they're so immensely popular. It's not magic. It's not a bazooka. It's not, you know what I mean? It just happens to work for the same reason that, most motorcycles have many of the same characteristics. Most cars have many of the same, they kind of design, and boom. Okay. Now we got it. Now we, and we'll make it a different color and we'll make it a little bit different here and there, but generally it's pretty much the same thing.
And what do you think about what is California? And Newsom? What are they getting wrong right now about gun laws?
Oh, so I think what they're getting wrong is they are looking at criminals. They're looking at the destruction of career criminals and deranged criminals. And what they're causing is horrific. When you see a mass shooting by a deranged person, it's horrific and sad. And if you don't have a lump in your throat, you're not human. I mean, it's really truly sad. And when you look at these statistics and you see, hundreds killed in Chicago or whatever, you're looking at the statistics of, career criminals against career criminals. They're killing each other. And they're looking at those horrific, scary, horrible numbers, and then they're going after me. They're going after law-abiding, people that live in, live according to the law. People that are, their career isn't criminal, and they just want to defend themselves. They just want to protect themselves.
Yeah, I find that they tend to use guns as an excuse for things like broken families or lack of opportunities. It's an easy scapegoat. When you're not addressing some of these other issues, to just blame the gun.
Well, I got to tell you, it's so crazy. So about 2/3, if you look at the people, where if there's a death and a gun's involved in the United States, about 60,000 a year, somewhere around there. About 2/3 of those are suicides.
Right.
That's not a gun issue. That's not a gun problem. It's not 100% of people who commit suicide don't use a gun.
Right.
And 100% of gun deaths aren't. If you get rid of the gun, it will not get rid of 100% of the gun deaths.
Right.
But particularly the suicides, there are other ways to commit suicide. There are other, it's a suicide issue. And if you could find, if they would effectively try to tackle the mental health issues behind suicide, it would solve a lot of problems. And there's a lot of people talking about homeless issues right now. And if you go down and look at some of the homeless folks, they're having some kind of mental health crisis.
Right.
It's very, very obvious. But instead, for example, with the homelessness, they say, "Oh, we'll build affordable housing." Okay, well, that's not. You know what I mean? It
doesn't address the issue.
If you go down to around Petco and downtown, where the 94 is, or whatever, it's not that they can't balance their checkbook, and that's the problem. You know what I mean? They look at these problems and they go, all right, well, we can't really solve that, or we don't have the fortitude to solve that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the easy way out. We're going to blame guns. We're going to blame something else. But if they really truly went after the root causes, I think that it'd be far more effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll give you another quick example. Yeah. So CCWs, carry permits. If you go through a background check, if you go through the application, you go through a class, pay the fee, go through a lot of steps, and after a few months, you can get a permit so that you can carry a firearm for self-defense.
Right.
In California, It's going through the roof. There were, in 2017, there were about 1,100 CCWs in San Diego. Now there are just over 10,000.
Oh, really?
And they're pushing out 500 to 600 per month, just in San Diego County.
Yeah.
So there's a huge interest in carry permits. Well, Sacramento and, you know, the governor and the attorney general and especially the state senate just threw a fit. And they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Because of all these mass shootings, because of all the deaths, we're going to make it, sure, you can get a permit, but we're going to make it impossible for you to carry anywhere outside of your house. So you can't carry in grocery stores, churches,
right?
At Walmart, all these different restaurants, you name it. Yeah. Basically, every place outside of your home is a sensitive area.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't make any sense at all, right? I mean, if it's almost the opposite, it's going to have the opposite effect. It's not going to keep people safer. It's going to possibly put them in more danger because now they're defenseless.
Right.
And when people hear that, they're kind of skeptical. Wait a minute, what do you mean they're defenseless? Like, how often does that really happen?
Right.
And if you look at mass shootings, because there already are existing sensitive areas where people can't carry even if they have a permit. Schools,
the banks, I think.
Not banks, but post office, schools. Well, if you decide, hey, I don't want you to carry in my workplace, then that's now so
if the business owner says, hey, no guns in my
it's not a gun-free zone, right? Over 95% of mass shootings have happened in a gun-free zone. That's no longer, it's not a coincidence,
right?
You're not going to go, you don't see a mass shooting at a gun shop, you see a mass shooting where people don't have guns,
right?
Between studies show, there's FSU has a criminologist named Gleck who's quoted by both his work is quoted by both sides, the pro-gun, the anti-gun, pro-Second Amendment, anti-Second Amendment. They both quote his work. The CDC did a study. Gleck from FSU did a study. A guy named John Lott, who's an economist, and he studies crime statistics. All three of them have put together studies. And between 1 million and 3 million times per year, somebody uses a firearm somehow to defend themselves against a violent crime.
Oh, wow.
Now, that doesn't mean that they actually have shot somebody. They could just say, hey, I have a gun.
Right.
And then the crime stops, but that's a lot. Between 1 million and 3 million, and those are three different, CDC is a government agency. John Lott is, an economist. Gleck is academia. I mean, these aren't NRA or Fox News studies.
Right.
So the solution, it's like they're kind of grabbing onto these problems to further an agenda that already exists. They already don't want, firearms generally carried or owned. So here we're going to glom onto this problem and pretend this is a solution.
Right.
And it's just not right.
Right. Well, what state gets it right? Is there a state that you think kind of gets it right?
It's actually, I honestly, and I don't know all the ins and outs of every single state. I'm pretty hyper focused on, especially Southern California, but California. But really, most states get it right. It's the opposite. There are only a handful of states that are really, really, really restrictive, like California, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York. There are a couple others that are really, and if you look, you have some of the worst gun crime. Chicago in Illinois, Illinois's got extremely restrictive gun laws, and they have some of the worst murder rates, not just in the nation, but in the world.
Right.
It's easier to point out the handful of states that don't get it right compared to the 40 plus states that do get it right. Florida was a leading state that they were one of the first to start issuing carry permits on a shall issue basis, basically meaning, hey, if you can pass the background check, take the course, pay the fee, fill out the application, you're getting a CCW. And it's been amazingly successful. Really more states get it right than don't.
Maybe to make it clear, when you get a CCW, what kind of firearm can you carry? Is it just you're just a traditional handgun?
Typically.
Okay.
Well, in California,
Mhm.
it's just handguns.
Okay.
They've been inspected. But yeah, it's just
Yeah.
handguns, and they,
Okay.
like I said, they've been inspected to make sure that they have all their safety devices in
Yeah.
place. They don't have a hair trigger,
Okay.
that sort of thing.
Good question. And sometimes for some people who aren't unfamiliar with guns, what is a hair trigger?
Just means that you don't have to pull. It's a good question. Thank you. If you don't have to pull the trigger very hard for the gun to fire.
So you don't have to squeeze.
Right.
Okay.
So typically a trigger is somewhere around, you have to apply about 5 pounds of pressure on a typical gun. Typically it varies.
Yeah.
But 5 pounds, and a hair trigger would probably be, half that, or even a little less than half that.
Yeah. One of the things I've noticed too is I feel like people change their gun views when they have a family. I know that if you have kids and you're married, you got a home, you start to really realize, not that you're trying to hurt anybody, but man, if somebody comes and hurts me and they have a gun and I don't, sometimes spitting facts doesn't change people, but having a family does. I know kind of did that for me myself. So do you see that a lot when people start having families, that's kind of when the trigger in their head goes off in terms of maybe I should get something to defend myself?
A lot of times there's some kind of life event, family, definitely. And it'd be, perfectly frank.
Yeah.
Someone gets a family and they could go one of two ways. They could say, well, I got kids now, so I don't want a gun in the house.
Sure.
Where another one's going, I got kids now, I need a gun in the house. You know what I mean? Like I gotta, if something happens, I gotta protect, either mom or dad. I was saying, I gotta protect this kid.
Right.
This kid's got to get to 18, on my watch. What am I gonna do if somebody comes into this house? I've only had a CCW for a few years, because they didn't issue CCWs in San Diego until 2017. We forced them to issue. Our organization fought really hard and got them to issue. So I carried, for a few months, and I remember, I was hanging out at home or whatever, and I had to go to the grocery store, get something.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, I'll just, and then I remember having my hand on the doorknob and thinking, if this is the time, that something happens, and I didn't take the 3 minutes to, put the holster on, and this is the time, I'll never forgive myself.
Right.
If I could have helped somebody, if I could have helped myself something, I'll never forgive myself. So just go get it. So once I started to carry, and a lot of people talk about this, you start thinking about, like, oh my God, how did I go through life without, I'm completely vulnerable right now,
naked.
And you really do start to think, it's just pretty unbelievable. I've noticed that, and people have reported that it's the road rage doesn't happen when you're carrying. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, you're just like, I don't need to,
Like you're saying when you carry, you're actually more calm, as opposed to kind of more aggressive. Is that?
Well, I don't know if I'd say there's a calming effect, but there's also the idea of, hey, I have an enormous responsibility on my belt right now.
Right.
So I'm going to take that very, very seriously.
Yeah.
I went through all this training. I went through the class, background check, et cetera, et cetera. I worked really, really hard to get this responsibility. I'm not going to mess it up.
Right.
So I think it's a little bit more along those lines.
Yeah. Is it ever a worry that, and here's one of my worries with, a person doesn't need a CCW to do this, but sometimes my worry is sometimes citizens becoming police officers, and almost thinking that, hey, if they could be maybe just a couple arguing, and they want to go over there and try to be, hey, what's going on here? And all of a sudden he's in a conversation or altercation with the husband or whoever, and it gets something, then boom, he pulls out a gun. Is that ever a concern? Do you ever worry about something like that? Or
I always worry about any kind of criminal activity and that sort of thing. But statistically and anecdotally, it doesn't happen. In fact, it's the opposite. And when you go through the required training, there's a lot of emphasis on the fact that a carry permit doesn't change your level of authority. It doesn't change your role in society. You don't have a different, criteria for lethal force, that sort of thing. All a carry permit does is it exempts you from the law that requires you to carry a firearm unloaded and locked.
Okay.
So anybody that's transporting a firearm,
Right.
it has to be unloaded and locked. If you have a carry permit, you're now exempt from that law. So it doesn't give you an additional authority. It doesn't turn you into some kind of junior cop or anything like that. And that's something that is emphasized and talked about a lot in the most basic carry classes, as well as continuing education. There's a lot of continuing education. There's a lot of opportunities to do more continuing education in the firearms community. And so again, statistically and anecdotally, it just doesn't happen. Do I worry about it? I think it kind of crosses everybody's head,
right?
But I've found that the firearms community really isn't full of, kind of this weird bravado. It's almost like, with like martial arts, like if you're like a yellow belt, you're a little cocky, but if you're a black belt, you're pretty calm. You know what I mean? You don't go picking fights. You kind of, and it's a little more like that. It's a little more like again, people realize I have this enormous responsibility.
Right. Yeah. One of sometimes the issues that we face is with straw buyers of guns. Basically if I own let's say I have a clean record, I can go buy some guns and then, and an example, if you have a bad record, and then I'd sell you that gun right under my name. What are your thoughts about people having to register their guns and maybe even possibly having for example, every 5 years or 10 years, having to re-register or at least prove you're still in possession of those firearms? Is that?
I think that if it's so tough that there's so many bad laws that we fight that registration isn't even on the radar.
Okay.
If registration was the worst thing we had to deal with, or that was the most restrictive gun law that we had to deal with, I don't know if my organization would exist.
Okay. Right.
That being said, and the Supreme Court has said that registration is not unconstitutional. But there have been times in history, they say that registration is only good for confiscation and taxation. That's it. That's the only thing it does. Meaning that there have been times where they've implemented, a registration process, and it just doesn't really help solve crime, doesn't help prevent crime, doesn't really do much for crime statistics. There have been certain districts that, tried universal registration and then reversed it because it just wasn't doing anything and it was costing a lot of money. Right. So do I think it's the worst offense in Second Amendment, history? No, it's not the worst, but I think that if someone's being fair, someone who is maybe pro registration, if they're really truly being fair, then they'd have to admit too that it's not, it doesn't do all that much either. Right. It doesn't really help any situation all that much.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on, you had mentioned that, you're an organization that believes in, I think you said, I forget, there's 3 things:
sane, trained, and law abiding.
So how do we determine if somebody's sane?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
We leave it up to the courts.
Okay.
If somebody's when you're going through your background check, there are certain and it's such a broad spectrum. If someone is nervous and anxious and they talk to a psychiatrist, should that eliminate them from being able to buy a gun? Yeah, probably not. But if they've been deemed, that they are unable to care for themselves, unable to, they're danger to themselves or others in certain situations, that sort of thing. Then that's it's pretty inarguable that that even the most staunch supporter of Second Amendment rights would say, those laws are okay.
Yeah.
But it is difficult. There's been a due process is extremely important. It exists for a reason, and it's something that I think the United States should be very, very proud of. The fact that we this is a major part of why we're a successful nation. So there've been red flag laws that have been introduced. And a red flag law is a broad term that describes basically a law or a process procedure that's put in place that will hopefully prevent somebody from doing something, horrible.
Okay.
Basically they look at, mass shootings or whatever, and they think, hey, if someone could step in before they, fell off the cliff, and, did something horrific, wouldn't that be great? And it would be.
Right.
The most common form of red flag laws are gun violence restraining orders. And I'm the very, very brief description of what a gun violence restraining order is if someone says, hey, I think that person's dangerous, law enforcement can take their firearms, and then they have to go to court to prove they're okay, based on an accusation.
Right.
Now, this sounds, I think a lot of people think, well, that sounds reasonable, Mike, but I got to tell you, we've had gun violence restraining orders for a few years in California. Our city attorney really embraced them and promoted them. And, when I sat down and spoke with her name's Mara Elliott, I said, well, if someone's breaking the law, you can take firearms. Law enforcement they've been able to for decades.
Right.
If someone's not breaking the law, why are we taking firearms? And she looked at me like a deer in headlights. She had no answer.
Right.
And she gave a bunch of examples of gun violence restraining orders that she'd issued. And they were hard to argue with because someone was clearly breaking the law. Well, if they're breaking the law, you can already take their firearms. Right. So why are we using a gun violence restraining order? So, okay, Mike, if that's not good, but if they could already take the firearm and they're using gun violence restraining orders, what's the problem? Well, the problem is there's a significant percentage of these gun violence restraining orders where someone's not breaking the law. And I've gotten phone calls from people who need an attorney because they posted a meme on Facebook and their coworker didn't like it. They got nervous, and didn't like that meme. He was already the weird guy in the office anyway, I've gotten phone calls from people who, their roommate, they were in a financial dispute and their roommate knew, hey, he owns firearms. I'm going to report him, get a gun violence restraining order against him. I've seen them used vindictively. And when you have this process and procedure where the, due process is on the back end, it's too dangerous. It's just too dangerous.
Yeah. I could see people being vindictive and using that to hurt people. And then obviously once you take their guns away, how they can, if they really wanted to, couldn't they come after you?
Well, so exactly. So, so if 90% of the thing is, if 90% of it, and I'm this is not a reliable statistic, but let's say 90% of these gun violence restraining orders are, clearly being used on criminals where we could have taken their guns anyway, and 10% are used, vindictively. That's not a good law. You know what I mean? It's just not. It's not helpful. Why have it on the books? Now, does that mean that we should, stop the idea of trying to come up with some kind of red flag law? I'm not saying that at all. I can tell you though that there are a ton of red flags. I just interviewed this guy, Andrew Pollack. He wrote a book called Why Meadow Died. And Meadow is his daughter.
Oh, wow.
And Meadow was a victim of the Marjorie Stoneman school shooting.
Okay.
And, he was devastated. And he wanted to get to the bottom of what happened here. And he found out that the horrible criminal who shot that school up and killed his daughter had been visited by law enforcement over 50 times, and it's like, well, and that's just one example. But if you please read that book, everybody listening, read the book, Why Meadow Died. It's so touching. He's such a good guy. But there are already, something already could have happened. If you've been visited 50 times by law enforcement, there's clearly a problem. There's clearly a problem. And there are so many questions in that case. But if you look at all these, horrific mass shootings that make the headlines, every one of them, there were all kinds of red flags where this person should have gotten help. There should have been somebody that stepped in and there's no need for any additional law. It just needs to be executed,
Right.
and people need to enforce it. So
one of the big hot topics too is ghost guns. Explain how ghost guns work and some of the what are your thoughts on ghost guns?
Sure.
Yeah.
So a ghost gun is kind of a nickname for a gun that doesn't have a serial number on it, which serial number, again, for registration purposes.
Right.
In what's happening, what happened is I'm going to say about 10 years ago, it started to get really popular for, back in like the 50s and 60s, guys were working on their cars.
Mm-hmm.
Then back in the 90s, they were working on their computers, well, it started getting really popular to build your own gun.
Right.
And if you build your gun and you're not going to sell it to somebody, you're just going to use it for your own personal use. There's no law that requires you to serialize it, et cetera.
Okay.
So what was happening is criminals, of course, if they get any kind of gun, what's the first thing they do?
Take the serial number.
Take the serial number off. So now, is that a ghost gun? Technically,
yeah.
So, or there is definitely evidence that criminals were starting to build their own guns. That's pretty rare.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty rare, but it's definitely happening. So again, it was kind of this approach that really lacked eloquence. They just said, all right, we're going to make everybody, we're going to punish everybody, because of this issue here. So a lot of the hobbyists, the guys that aren't breaking the law, they're not selling their guns to criminals. They're not, committing crime. Right. They're just hobbyists. They're making their gun and they're whatever. A lot of them are engineers that work at Qualcomm and whatever, you know what I mean? Like the kind of do it yourself kind of guys.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, they've tightened things down so much that they've turned people into criminals overnight that didn't realize, like, wait a minute, I'm a criminal now, because I have to take 8 steps that aren't very clear. No one understands. Or they've made the process so difficult that it's impossible to comply with. Yeah. Now, what I mean by that is the city of San Diego, a couple other cities, county as well, have said, okay, in order to build a firearm, you have to first serialize the raw material and then take the raw material, register the raw material and then build the firearm. But that doesn't exist. Right. You can't really do it's kind of this, so the state had like this, like, okay, well, here's the 15 steps it takes, and at some point you have to serialize it. Yeah. You have to report that to, California DOJ. And the city and county of San Diego took that step and put it at number 1, which means you can't get to number 2. Yeah. So
it also tells, to me, what it communicates too is, if you can really make your own gun, the genie's out of the bag. If you can make your own gun, there really is no way to get rid of guns. Even if that, and for some people have that pipe dream of, I just want to get, they think all guns can somehow just be swept away. That's not even a possibility anymore.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah,
but I also want to be clear. Statistically, I don't have the statistic in front of me, but the statistics I have seen, the reliable ones, very few people in the world, criminal or not, are making their own guns. Yeah. Like, it's really, it kind of turned into the anti-gun crowd. The organizations that like more restrictive gun laws, they kind of grabbed this boogeyman and said, okay, this is our thing right now. And meanwhile, the rest of the gun world is going, who builds their own gun? Like, I want, you know what I mean? Like, I want a nice, high quality,
Right.
So a lot of people ask about ghost guns, and it's totally legit. And there are definitely things going on. And we actually have a lawsuit against the city and county of San Diego. But it is such a small piece of the puzzle. Again, if you go back, 2/3 of people who are killed and a gun's involved, it's a suicide. Yeah. And here we're having this huge public discussion on public policy, with the government on ghost guns. Right. We're like, nothing, you know what I mean? It's like if you got rid of every single ghost gun, if nobody ever again, if you could somehow wave a magic wand and no one ever again got hurt with a ghost gun, it wouldn't even touch the numbers.
It's kind of like who builds their own cars.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can, but it's very few people do it.
Or you know what it'd be like? It'd be like saying, hey, we're going to stop drunk drivers by making sure that everybody that builds their own car has a seatbelt in it. So, well, wait a minute. Like none of that, you know what I mean? Nobody builds their own car, let alone drunk drivers.
Right.
You know? Number one. Number two, the seatbelt doesn't, you know, anyway.
Yeah. Also, you know, one of the things a lot of people don't realize, you know, we're very close to the border here. I go to Mexico all the time. They have some of the strictest gun laws. Yeah. And, you know, it's just as violent as anywhere else. Yeah. You know, and it's kind of sad because, you know, some people, they don't have the right, especially if you're out in, you know, if you're on the ranch or in a farm, you don't really have the right. You don't have the opportunity to defend yourself. Somebody says, hey, I want to, you know, use your avocado farm or whatever to drug traffic. I mean, you can't even defend yourself. You can't even say no, you know, and people, you know, we're kind of, you know, we're obviously a little spoiled here in the States where we don't maybe face those things all the time. But if it came to it, you know, one of the advantages of living here is that criminals know you can only get so far because of the fact that somebody has the opportunity to push back, you know, and defend themselves.
They did a study a few years ago in Florida where they interviewed a number of folks that were serving time in prison and asked them what their biggest fear was. And an armed victim. Oh, wow. Was one of their biggest. That was the biggest fear that they had, and one of the most common. You know, I'm certainly not an expert on Mexico. I know that it's a beautiful country, and I've had a lot of fun when I've visited there. But everything I've read, and from other people's perspective that I've read, they have a lot of problems. Yeah. A lot of problems with corruption, a lot of problems with, you know, the cartels, not just drug cartels, but human trafficking. So I think that it's such an enormously layered problem. But I definitely think that part of it is if people can defend themselves, it'd probably be a different looking country.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you had mentioned, and I'm glad you brought up the book, Why Meadow Died. Are there other, for somebody who's maybe interested in learning about gun rights, and are there other books or other personalities you would say, hey, you know, listen to this person or read this book? Yep. Who would you recommend?
There's a couple. I can't remember his name. Such a good dude. Stephen Holbrook, the Founders' Second Amendment, and it's kind of a history. It is the history of the Second Amendment. Like, you know, what were they thinking at the time? The Founders' Second Amendment by Stephen Holbrook. Okay. Really smart guy. He's an attorney by trade and did a great job with that book. And there's another one. John Lott is an economist who I mentioned earlier, and he studies. One of the things he does is studies crime statistics, and his book, More Guns, Less Crime. Basically, he was a professor, and he was asked to look at some crime statistics, found out there really weren't a lot of reliable crime statistics. So he dug in deeper and tried to get good and reliable numbers. And not being a gun guy, he's not a gun guy. Right. He came to the conclusion that, wow, the more legal guns owned in an area, the less crime there is. Wow. You know, and it was a career builder. You know, this book for him. I mean, it's really exploded, and he does a lot of analysis. But More Guns, Less Crime, the Founders' Second Amendment are both fantastic Second Amendment books.
Awesome. And how can you know, I'm gonna be wrapping it up here, but how can somebody, you know, somebody wants to reach out to you guys in your organization and your radio show, how would they go about doing that? A lot of ways. It all starts at our website. Go to San Diego County Gunowners.com or gunownersradio.com. You can listen to us every Sunday from 4 to 6 on 1170 AM or YouTube or podcast. Our organization, San Diego County Gun Owners, you can come. We have 3 monthly meetings in San Diego. They're different, our same agenda, different locations. We have an annual gala. We have a Christmas party. We have a summer picnic. We have shooting socials on the weekends. Oh, wow. There's a ton of opportunity to, you know, and come and just check us out. You know, if you're not sure you want to be a gun owner, or if you're a gun owner and you're not sure you want to be a part of this organization, we're wide open, you know, open arms, come on down, you know, meet a bunch of really great people. We have a really great women's program called Not Me, where if you're a woman who wants to own a firearm, wants training, wants a carry permit, or any one or two of those things, we will introduce you to a female volunteer who's trained, and she will help
her
That's awesome.
get every piece of that. It's not just information on a pamphlet or a website.
Yeah.
It's a hands-on, roll up the sleeves, let's get this done.
Yeah.
And if any part of that is cost prohibitive, we'll
Yeah.
find a discount or a grant, and we'll make sure they get taken care of.
That's awesome. Well, Mike, I really appreciate you coming out and
Thank you.
talking. Hey, it was a pleasure.
You bet.
And
Thank you.
hopefully we'll be seeing each other again.
Excellent.
Thank you.